Alright folks, good and bad news. Good news is we have oil pressure. Bad news is we do not have enough oil pressure. So quickly just address the elephant in the room. The Mosquito at the moment is currently on hold and we are about a month behind on it. By the time you see all of this, hopefully we'll be back onto it, but we do have quite a few things to get done on the Mozzie. Before we do that, we do need to finish the Mark III. Now, this pair of legs belongs to apprentice Kev. Essentially, what I found the other day was we had about 20 to 25 PSI of oil pressure, which I thought was Mickey Mouse. Unfortunately, it wasn't. With the plugs out and cranking, we should get approximately 50 to 75 PSI of oil pressure upon cranking. Unfortunately, we had about a third of that. What that means now is we need to work out why we have such little oil pressure. Not only did we have low oil pressure, but the further I cranked it, the more the gauge actually started to go backwards. So originally it would start to work up and get to about 20, 25, and then over time it would slowly drop off to 20, 15, 10, 5, and then eventually it went back to 0. Spoke to a couple of people, including my good mate Paul Jeffries and the BMC Whisperer on Instagram, and they pretty much both said the exact same thing. There is a vacuum leak in the oil system and we need to work out where it's coming from. Now, chances are it's probably the oil pump gasket that's leaking and I just need to change it. But if it's not that, then we do, oh, my watch is just going bananas. If it's not that, we do have to pull the entire engine apart and figure out what the hell is going on. One thing I didn't check on this is the bearing clearances. So I've got Kev here at the moment. We're gonna pull the engine, we're gonna strip the transfer case, we're gonna check out the oil pump gasket and make sure that the pickup at the back of the block is connected properly. Failure to do that could be the O-ring or it could be the bearing clearances of all the bearings inside there. So I'll show you guys how to do that, but essentially this is what we're up to. Really quite devastated, but the good thing about this is it has happened now before we start the car. If the car had started and we'd had no oil pressure, it might have only been 5 to 10 seconds, and then we might have pulled the pin and worked it out. If not, and you started it, run it, revved it up to 2000 RPM, it would not be long before you do irreversible damage and then have to strip this thing back apart and get it back to the machine shop and start all over again. So once again, it is important to make sure that you have oil pressure prior to starting a freshly built engine. So let's pull the engine out, let's get this thing stripped and figure out exactly what is going on. All right, crisis averted. Pretty certain we worked out what was actually happening with this. So it turns out the oil pump gasket had, well, shut itself and jumped out of my hand. I'll put a picture up on the screen, but essentially just here, hopefully you can see, it has a split in it. On the right angle, you can have a look and it is torn all the way through. Essentially what it's doing is, in behind here is where it creates its vacuum. And because it's sucking in air through here, it's therefore not creating the vacuum we need. And when it did, the oil pressure would rise, and then this is what caused it to bleed off and not hold pressure. So thank Christ we found that. The time is currently 10 past 10. We're just going to quickly assemble the transfer case, bolt the clutch on, and then put the starter in and then crank it and make sure we got oil pressure before we go and slap this thing back together. And if we do, finito. We put it back in the car and keep going with the episode. All right, so engine is back in, everything's connected. I've got the 1¼ inch SU carbies in there at the moment. Everything's in there just kind of somewhat loosely. I don't have the engine steady bar in there. There's no coolant in there at the moment. I just want to start it and just run it for probably 30 seconds to a minute to bed the new head gasket in, which you need to do with BK 450 head gaskets on a 1275. As you can hear, I've got my fan going for two reasons. One, it's probably going to stink out the shed, and two, the shed already stinks because as I cranked it, I forgot to connect the fuel pipe that goes from the fuel pump to the carbies, and it sprayed fuel all under the car. So it currently stinks. I've already cranked it, hence the fuel spill underneath. I know I've got oil pressure. I've got 50 pound of oil pressure, which is fabulous. Let's give it a go. Let's get this thing started.
think I've got the timing wrong, to be completely honest. Just going to double check the points gap. Just make sure the spark is actually jumping. Yep, so we've got a nice strong blue spark, which is fabulous. All right, let's try this. Alright, so we have the vehicle fired up behind us. Woo! Finally. Alright, so now it's on to reassembling everything, get it to a point where it's able to run, and do it under its own steam with the minimalist amount of work connected. That way we can bed the camshaft in. So essentially we're just going to rev it at 2000 RPM for 20 minutes. If the temperature starts to climb during that time, we're just going to let it cool down. Set a timer for when we start it and then when we stop it, and then just keep going until we get to 20 minutes. We want to make sure as well that we do it at about 2000 RPM, maybe 2500, just to bed that camshaft in properly. It's just make sure that everything works smoothly. I am going to actually be replacing the radiator on this as well. You didn't see in the last scene, but just as I finished the engine, in that last scene, before I went to turn it off, a spanner that was sitting on the quarter panel actually fell into the fan and destroyed it and smashed it into about 5,000 pieces. So yeah, that was fun, not. So that's another expense that I need to pay for, but that's part and parcel of building these cars. And we're actually going to be upgrading the radio as well, because the radiator, because it is damaged as well. It doesn't appear to be leaking. I've got water in it at the moment, which is good, but we're going to upgrade it to an alloy one. So I'm going to wear the cost of that. Yeah, like the old saying goes, no loose items around engines when they're running. So learn from my mistakes. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. I'm going to do that in the background. Hopefully next episode you see will be us driving this thing on the road once it's ready, and once I've given a bit of a tune. So catch you on the next episode of Tomo's Tune Ups.